Hi everyone, we hope you are doing well today. We are going to present the chapter 8 Paranoid Parenting. In 2018, Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt wrote in their book titled The Coddling of the American Mind something very interesting called the paranoid parenting. But what exactly is paranoid parenting? Well, to understand better what paranoid parenting is, Lukianoff and Haidt show us the America's worst mom. In this case, they introduce us to Leonore Skenazy, a very renowned author and journalist from New York. She made an experiment where she permitted her 9-year-old son to ride the New York subway by himself. For that reason, she armed him with a subway map, a metro card, a $20 bill, and several quarters in case he needed to make a call, and then sent him on his way. Their purpose was that he could find his way back home and ask a stranger for help if he needed to. The result was that her son arrived home 45 minutes later, very enthusiastic for his success and motivated to do it again.
However, when Leonore published her experience, she received a huge number of online messages, mostly condemning her decision and naming her as American Worst Mom. But what is the origin of the repudiation of this type of paternity that promotes independence and self-sufficiency in children? To understand this, we must go back to the 70s and 80s when the crime rate was much higher. For example, we can find the case of Ethan Patz, a 6-year-old boy who in 1979 convinced his parents to let him walk the 2 blocks that separated his apartment from his school bus stop, and who never returned home or his body was found. Or the case of Adam Walsh, in 1981, who was also 6-year-old and who one day was dropped off by his mother at a kiosk where a new Atari video game system was being promoted while he walked into a lamp shop for a few minutes. An incident with some teenagers started and the guards left everyone out. Adam, too shy to ask about his mother, was attracted to a stranger who offered him candy and toys. The stranger turned out to be a serial killer, and Adam's severed head was found 2 weeks later, 130 miles away.
These situations are what we might understand as the parents' worst fear. However, there is a big difference between the real risks and the imaginary ones. For example, in FBI figures, almost 90% of the cases of children, they have miscommunicated their plans, misunderstood directions, or run away from home or foster care, and in 98% of the time, missing children come home. In the rare cases of kidnappings, the vast majority are perpetrated by a relative of the victim. In fact, crime figures have declined dramatically since the 1990s. However, the fear that situations like those of Ethan or Adam will occur has not abated. All this has led to the emergence of another key concept within the work of Lukianoff and Haidt, which would be safetyism.
To understand what safetyism means, let's explore the example of a Missouri family who in 2015 kidnapped their own 6-year-old son. They wanted to teach him a lesson about how dangerous it is to be friendly to strangers. After getting off his school bus, the boy was lured into a pickup truck by his aunt's co-worker. Then, the man told the little boy that he would never see his mommy again. According to the sheriff's statement, the police also reported that the man covered the boy's face with a jacket so he couldn't tell he was being taken into his own basement. The boy was tied up, threatened with a gun, and told he would be sold into sex slavery. We can justify to some extent the fear that parents have of their children encountering a dangerous person. It's this kind of fear that has motivated many to adopt safetyism behaviors. However, wouldn't it be better to educate children to identify and deal with these kind of dangers?
The problem with safetyism arises with the fact that many safety campaigns, such as the use of seat belts, bicycle helmets, not smoking near children, have been very successful and have significantly reduced the numbers of death and serious injury in children. This has led many parents to become aware of safety and, in some cases, to extreme safetyism. This means, in the long term, that the interest of protecting the child from any danger he or she is deprived of experience, independence, and skills. In the words of Lebanese essayist and the researcher Nassim Nicholas Taleb, by placing a protective shield over our children, we inadvertently atrophy their growth and deprive them of the experiences they need to become successful and functional adults. This is complemented by the current social organization where women enjoy more opportunities, political rights, and access to better health systems, which has given them more time to interact with and monitor their children. But these factors influence the creation of a tendency towards safetyism, where young adults are raised more fragile and anxious, and consequently more prone to what Lukyanov and Haidt have called the unfruit of fragility. What doesn't kill you makes you weaker.
But suffering campaigns and fears engendered from parents are not the only reason for this trend towards safetyism. There is also the fact that the laws and policies of many countries have conditioned the action of many parents. Socially, parents who motivate their children to be more independent or self sufficient are labeled as bad parents, and good parents are those who believe that their children are in constant danger and should be supervised every moment. The legal consequences of not having close supervision over children range from charges of felony or negligence to situations where custody of children is removed and both parents and children are forced to take psychological therapy. Even in some situations, you can get arrested or imprisoned. Technically, the laws force parents to overprotect children, and when we combine all the above mentioned aspects with the legal side, we realize why many parents choose to limit their children's independence.
On the other hand, it's necessary to point out that there are large social class differences in parenting styles. This is another author focus. Then, the question here is how does social class influence parenting practices? First of all, the authors use Annette Luro terms, such as middle class, which includes the middle class but also an upper one. And another essential term is the working class, let's say everyone below middle class, including poor families. In order to answer this question, those two kinds of social classes are compared and analyzed in terms of scholarship, parents' relationship, and the way how parents educate their children, in other words, their parenting style. On the one hand, in middle class families, parents have a 4 year college degrees, they are married and employ a style that Luro called a concerted cultivation. This kind of style seeks to cultivate talents in children as well as fill their calendars with different activities, experiences, and so on. Similarly, parents are more attentive to their kids and use reasoning more to correct than physical punishments. But if we consider what happens in the family work or the work class family, it is really the opposite. For example, in this family, there are divorces or there are marriages, and school degrees of parents are lower. In addition to this, they use the style a natural growth, which means that children don't need excessive guidance from their parents. They have leisure time. Likewise, parents don't talk too much with their kids and sometimes need physical discipline.
Considering these differences among families and their social classes, for the author it was valuable to recall that the working class with unstructured and less rigid parenting style, children could develop better social skills and a sense of autonomy. Dr. Benjamin Spock confirms this and adds that in the past, there was this kind of freedom for generations like Gen X or baby boomers. However, between the 80s and the 90s, the dominant ideas changed permissive breeding to an intensive one, which had consequences for both social classes. For example, in the middle class, parents began to think about how to give advantage and competencies to their children for the adult institution of the future, while the working class didn't seek to stimulate the child for that adult future. The last element caused disadvantage for the lower class child, as they didn't fit into the system. But also, to this disadvantage, we can add another one: chronic and severe adversities. A survey called Adverse Childhood Experiences demonstrate that horrible childhood don't make children stronger, they make them weaker and causes toxic stress. That is kind of a stress that affects functions in the brain that work together to overcome challenges and solve problems. Consequences of this stress are troubles in concentration, control of behaviors, or be able to follow instructions.
To sum up, there are two ways of damaging children's development, both middle and working social classes. The first is to be negligent and allow children to go through abuse or violence of any kind, and the second one is to overprotect and overmonitor children by ensuring that they face any adversity or challenge in everyday life. Remembering these things mentioned throughout this video, it is essential to propose a final question. What are the final consequences of paranoid parenting, a culture of security, and a socio-political context that overprotect young people? Paranoid parenting and their culture of safetyism prepares today's children to embrace the three great untruths. Then, all of these ultimately leads children to think the following thoughts. The first one is the world is full of dangers. Then we must prepare ourselves emotionally for that. Another thought is what is outside is my enemy, the great unfair us versus them. And a final idea and thought is we must understand that anxiety and discomfort emotions could hurt me. So here appears the second untruth: always trust your feelings. So when I understand the anxiety and discomfort as emotions that could hurt me, I have to avoid committing to a situation of danger or stress to be safe. And finally, we have the great untruth: what doesn't kill you makes you weaker.
In conclusion, paranoid parenting consists of the following key elements. Overprotection leads to safetyism and limits the independence and self-sufficiency of children. Safetyism is justified by the fear rooted in parents after some cases of violence and crime of the past. There is a big difference between the imaginary that parents have about the risks that children can experience and the reality. The legal system and social classes have influenced the parenting method and in some way pushed them towards safetyism.